Hello everyone and welcome! I have one more Easter card for you. This is my last one for this year. Another wreath with a bunny. When I came up with the idea for my previous card with the wreath with just the eggs, I went through my stash, which by the way is not that big. All my stamps, dies and some embossing folders fit into 2 CD boxes and 1 DVD box. I looked if I have other dies I could use for the wreath. Here are all the dies I found. I will go through them as I go. Just keep in mind, this is just what I found in my stash. I didn't go and bought anything extra. This card is really a mix and match. Find what is in your stash and make a card. Before I started die cutting, I wanted to create a few colorful backgrounds. And because I still had a pink background from the card with the egg background, where I used the Nuvo shimmer powders, I decided to use the powder watercolors again. Not only I used the shimmer powders, I also used the brush powders. I did the same as in my previous video. I first used a clean water over the whole background and then I sprinkled the powder over it. I also used my brush to spread the color around. I split the cardstock into 2 with a washi. I didn't need the full sheet of paper with the same color. For this particular background, at the top, I used the Nuvo shimmer powder Atlantis Burst, as well as emerald green from the brusher set. And at the bottom section, I only used the brusher powders, the green and emerald green. And at some places, I sprinkled lemon yellow. For this video, I made only these 2 backgrounds because I already had a few backgrounds that I pre-made for my test card, so I didn't need to make more. These are the backgrounds that I pre-made, the pink one that I had left over from my previous video, and then I made yellow background, blue, purple, same green as I made earlier. This one I needed for more die cuts. I die cut all the pieces off camera. This probably took me the longest, but this is kinda expected. I will show you all the die cut pieces in a bit, but first I wanted to create a focal point. Just like in my previous video, I used a bunny, but here I used a stamp from this stamp set. This is a very old stamp set from Clearly Besotted. If you don't have stamp like this, in my previous video I hand drew a bunny, so you can use that. You can use a bigger egg as your focal point or some kind of flower instead. Because I created watercolor backgrounds for the die cutting, I wanted to have a watercolor look for the bunny as well. To achieve that, I used distress inks. In general, distress inks do not stamp well, plus I was using a textured paper. But overall, here it was okay because this was just a base layer. After I stamped the image, I squished 2 distress ink colors onto acrylic blocks. Anything slick will do. With my brush, I added a little bit of water to the inks and I watercolored the bunny. The colors I used are the tie-dye ink that I used for the stamping, and I also added the ink Gathered Twigs for some color variation. So the bunny is watercolored and dry, and since I added the golden splatter to the backgrounds, I also used the gold watercolors and splattered the bunny. And lastly, I fussy cut the bunny with my scissors. Next, I die cut a frame using 2 egg dies. Originally, I was going to just draw the shape of the egg like I did in my previous video, but then I thought it's going to be easier if I had a frame. So I took 2 egg dies, tape them with my washi tape so they stay together, and run it through my die cutting machine to create a frame. So now all the die cuts are prepared. Here you can see all the die cut images, some I die cut multiple times, and now I'm ready to start assembling the wreath. I started with the bunny and I adhered inside of the frame. To adhere the bunny, I used a liquid glue and I applied it at the bottom front of the bunny, and then I placed it behind the egg frame. Next, I used these die cuts with grass and I adhered it behind the bunny. I had to die cut two because it was a little bit too small, and to adhere them together, I used a liquid glue and then I attached it behind the bunny. I wanted to have a little bit of separation between the grass and the bunny, so I used a double-sided tape. And I actually attached the double-sided tape on the back of the bunny rather than the grass because it was much easier to attach it this way. The grass was a little bit wide and was sticking out, but that was no problem. I just used my scissors and cut the excess. And if you don't have a grass die, you could use a stencil or just blend some inks in the background or completely leave it out. Next, I adhered these branches with leaves. I die cut two branches with eucalyptus and the other one is, I think, dragon. And I also adhered some Easter eggs. I used the two smallest dies in the Sizzix set, one bigger egg and a few tiny ones, same ones that I used on the wreath on my previous card. And the idea was to tuck the eucalyptus branches behind the eggs, so I had to play with it a bit and figure out the placement. First, I adhered all the pieces I wanted to have on the left side, and then I moved to the right side. I didn't adhere the flowers that I kept for later. To adhere all the branches, I used a liquid glue, the same I did with the bigger egg, and for the smaller eggs, I used a mix of double-sided tape and glue. On the left side, I adhered one branch with the eucalyptus, the bigger egg, and two smaller eggs. And on the other side, I adhered the eucalyptus branch as well as the branch with the dragon and three smaller eggs. On the right side, I adhered the eggs first as I was able to tuck in the eucalyptus branch without any problems later, but I did cut off a small piece of the branch. Before adhering the eucalyptus, I first adhered the dragon and then I adhered the eucalyptus. And lastly, I adhered a few flowers. Originally, I was going to use stamps and fussy cut them, but when I went through my stash, I found these flower dies. They are partial dies, so they don't cut out fully, but I just used my scissors and cut them out. I was really happy that I found these dies, because this way everything is cohesive. On the right side of the wreath, I adhere them over the branches, and on the left side, I adhere them above the dragon branch. And to adhere them, I used a liquid glue. I let the panel dry, and in the meantime, I created a background. I decided to use a craft cardstock. This one is the Desert Storm from Nina. I first die cut it using a stitched rectangular die, and then I used the tea dye distress ink and blended the ink along the edges of the panel. It was a little bit uneven and blotchy, but in this case it wasn't a problem. After the wreath is attached, you won't see it at all. So the wreath is dry, now I can adhere it on top of the panel. I used a double-sided tape and I attached a thin piece along the frame. I already had a double-sided tape on the back of the bunny, so I just removed the backing paper and I used a liquid glue for the back of the grass. once all the tape was attached, I picked the wreath and I placed it on top of the background panel. I decided to use a white card base. I think it matches very well with the white frame. I applied a liquid glue over the back of the panel and I attached it onto the card base. You can use a double-sided tape for the panel, but I prefer to use liquid glue. For the greeting, I used a banner with Happy Easter sentiment. You saw me using this sentiment in my previous video. Here I just used a black cardstock and I heat embossed it in white and I cut it also into a banner. I placed a double-sided tape on the back of it and I attached it onto the card. One more thing, which is completely optional, I decided to add clear Nuvo drops on top of the flowers and also at some places over the wreath, where I also used the golden Nuvo drops. I let it fully dry and here is the finished card. I really love it. I'm truly surprised that I was able to create it, not because of my ability, but because I don't have that many supplies, especially dies. I hope you will try creating something similar. You can use only leaves, flowers, or just eggs, like I did on my previous card. If you haven't seen it, make sure to check it out. If you like this video, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe if you haven't done so already, and I will see you in my next video.